Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now, you call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
Hello, Quiet Rioters. This is Andreou. Just to say that we recorded this episode, obviously, before the United States decided to become a rogue state and its president went completely mad. Ironically, we all identify Venezuela as the crisis that might blow up early in 2026, but I don't think anyone expected that to happen 3 days in. We decided to stick with the scheduled episode, as it were, because, to be honest, at this point, what is there to say from a commentator's point of view? Arthur Snell, however, has secured a brilliant guest to do a special behind the lines on the Venezuela situation, which will be out either very late tonight Sunday or first thing Monday morning. So look for Behind the Lines with Arthur Snell on your favourite podcast app and subscribe so you get a notification as soon as that episode is published. That way we can share with you information and expertise about what's going on rather than just comment on it, for which I'm sure there will be plenty of time in the weeks to come. So sit back and enjoy this first Sunday School of 2026, in which we look forward to the new year.
Welcome to Quiet Riot, the politics podcast that's less new year, new me, and more same me, but with a fridge full of beige food leftovers. I'm Naomi Smith.
And I'm Andreou. We're here to help you stumble gently into the new year with calm, rational predictions, plus just enough nonsense to remind you that no one really knows what they're doing.
So cancel the gym induction you were never gonna attend anyway. Put down the spirulina smoothie you only bought for Instagram and join us as we usher in a brand new Quiet Riot.
Hello, I'm Alex, Quiet Riot's resident mystic Meg, gazing into my ball to predict the future with the confidence of a man who has been wrong before and will be again.
And I'm Naomi, the bean counter without a beanstalk, here to remind you that nothing in British politics is magical, except perhaps the disappearing act of election promises on contact with reality.
On this New Year Old You edition, we're peering ahead to 2026 to share our hopes, our fears, our predictions, and the tears we're quietly scheduling in advance as we embark on yet another lap of the sun.
We'll be horizon scanning at home and abroad, attempting to guesstimate the outcomes of elections, leadership dramas, global events, and assorted political plot twists. And to help us do that, we are delighted to welcome back author, campaigner, and CEO of the New Economics Foundation, Danny Sriskandarajah. Danny, welcome.
Hello, Naomi. Hello, Alex.
Welcome back, Danny.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
What is a spirulina smoothie?
Don't worry about it. If you don't know
okay.
about it, don't worry about it.
Danny, every year seems to arrive with a vibe. So I'm going to ask you, if 2026 was a political mood, what would it be?
I have a 12-year-old son who keeps using this phrase, rage baiting.
Ah,
It apparently means that he has license to make me angry or push my buttons. And I feel almost like 2026 is a year that's going to push my buttons, going to rage bait me with things that I really find distressing and disappointing. That's the vibe I'm feeling.
How is this different to 2025?
It's just more intense rage baiting.
Now let's start by zooming all the way out, because nothing says New Year clarity like attempting to summarize the entire planet. This is our global prediction section, where we look at the big forces shaping 2026, geopolitics, conflict, climate, and the shifting balance of power, and try to work out what actually matters beyond the noise. We're going to touch on the US midterms and what they mean for global stability, the ongoing consequences of Russia's war in Ukraine, and the conflicts that rarely dominate Western headlines but shape millions of lives across Africa and beyond. We'll also look at Europe's political trajectory and reflect on the small matter of it being 10 years since the UK voted to leave the EU, a decision that stubbornly refuses to stay in the past. This isn't about crystal ball certainty, it's about spotting patterns, pressures, and the likely points of rupture that could define the year ahead. So, to kick us off, looking globally, what do you think is the biggest risk in 2026 that isn't getting enough attention at the moment?
It is getting a bit of attention, but not nearly the sort of attention it deserves and at the level it deserves. And that, to me, is the sort of fundamental threats to democracy as we know it that are happening all around the world, even in so-called mature democracies. We talk a lot about the sort of manifestations of it that we see, low voter turnout or high levels of distrust in political institutions, political parties, elected representatives, and all of that. But I think there's something more sinister going on, which is that the things that buttress democracy around the world, the civic action, the social contract that binds us together, the ability to believe in some common truths, for example, all of those things that you need for a polity to work effectively, I think, are being chipped away at. And while they're being chipped away at, there's a sort of emergence of these other characters who are gaining political mileage by vandalizing those very institutions, right? So, populists who say, trust me, don't trust these institutions and the people who've occupied them for decades. I'm your savior. And we know that, history teaches us that's the route to authoritarian futures. And we focus on the sort of theater of politics, if you will, or the drama of politics, but we don't focus enough on the sort of foundations on which that theater is built.
In many ways, the theater of politics and the drama of politics is designed to take attention away from this stuff unfolding underneath, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I often think that, we focus on changing the people in power, but at the cost of changing power itself, with so many billions of people feeling angry at the world, disillusioned, changing who occupies the White House or Downing Street or whatever. That's important, don't get me wrong, but it's not going to fundamentally change trust in the system or participation in democratic life in the way we need it to.
I was going to go with something quite similar, actually, but a bit more specific, and that's the impact that AI is increasingly going to have on democracy around the world. I heard some very frightening gossip that the right in America is now seeding into the likes of Reform and other right-wing actors around Europe, this notion of using AI to model archetypes of all of us, voters, very, very specific archetypes, a woman with a degree who lives in, a major city and works in an NGO, what her response would be to any particular message or policy announcement. Millions of these archetypes being built and being used as a very, very quick turnaround form of focus grouping to inform what they can and can't get away with saying. And then that feeding into those very people being fed that message through AI content, bots replying to them on social media with certain prompts that will endear them to more populist policies. So I think that's something that isn't talked about enough. I think something that is being talked about more, but is nonetheless probably not at the forefront of a lot of people's minds, and that's the AI bubble popping and the wider market contagion that could have. I mean, we are talking if that bursts. And Danny, you're an economist, you'll know far better the detail of it than Alex and I, but just how profound an impact that could have by comparison to, say, 2008 or a dot-com burst back at the turn of the millennium. So I think AI in general is a huge opportunity, but a really mega risk to us being able to believe what we see and to make decisions in how we vote and how we participate in civic life, who we trust, who we don't, to such an enormous extent, it's almost unfathomable to get our brains around. And we know from all the research showing that humans are increasingly unlikely to be able to spot fake content from real. What about you, Alex?
I'm going to complete the trio of doom. The risk that is getting no attention, actually, is another pandemic. The dice odds mistake people make, that they think if you have rolled 4 sixes in a row, you consider another 6 somehow unlikely, when in truth, in a truly randomized thing, the odds are no different from one roll to the next. It's just exactly the same with genetic mutations. It feels to me like there is a belief that we're not due another one for years, when actually having had one 5 years ago is in no way a predictor of when the next deadly mutation will happen at all. There seems to be a sort of floppiness and a relaxed attitude underlying the way people are analyzing how we behaved in the last pandemic and what we could do better. This notion that we have time to fund the right things that we should be funding and weren't funding last time.
Yeah.
Like some higher power will give us a break for a decade. And I look at that and I worry, because the way air travel is at the moment, and also actually the way vaccinations have progressed, it makes mutation more likely, if anything. And we could end up in a situation of being caught with our pants down again. And that worries me.
Now, I don't have an exact budget for what this would cost, but I'm quite sure it's very modest compared to the potential harm. The World Bank estimates that if we have a worldwide flu epidemic, global wealth will go down by over $3 trillion, and we'd have millions and millions of deaths. These investments offer significant benefits beyond just being ready for the epidemic. The primary health care, the R&D, those things would reduce global health equity and make the world more just as well as more safe. So I think this should absolutely be a priority. There's no need to panic. We don't have to hoard cans of spaghetti or go down into the basement. But we need to get going because time is not on our side.
I agree with you, Alex, and I'm sure, Danny, you guys at NEF will too, because as ecosystems begin to break down and change and the environmental landscape for many animals changes, we will see more zoonotic disease leaping into human species as a consequence of changing ecosystems and biosystems and where animals have to leave their habitats to roam to, how we consume animals. Presumably, this is all stuff that can be modelled, probably is being modelled, but global actors aren't dealing with.
You guys are particularly gloomy for, this is not a great way to start.
So sorry.
Here, is it?
It was a question about the biggest risk.
We thought we'd get the properly terrifying shit out of the way first.
Well, let me pile on then, because I think you're right. Any of these risks that we've just talked about, I think the challenge for this year ahead and the moment in human history we find ourselves is that our collective resilience to withstand and respond to these challenges is just much weaker, right? Because if you think about it, we've got deep inequality in our societies. So if something really bad in the economy happens, for example, people who are already living marginal lives on the edge are going to find themselves even worse off and even more precarious. The state that should be there to intervene and respond and provide for those being left behind feels like it's being gutted in many parts of the world. We don't have the sort of public resources that many states threw at the pandemic response of 5 years ago, right? And then similarly with international cooperation, one way that we sort of responded to the last pandemic, and we might need to respond to a global economic crisis, is through effective international cooperation. But even in these last few years, trust at the intergovernmental level seems ultimately, much, much worse.
And I think also the public's willingness to follow instructions will have been weakened by all the Partygate stuff. So fingers crossed, it won't happen. But it is a fingers crossed situation.
One question I was going to ask was, and it's really to Danny's last point there, if one global institution looks weaker by the end of 2026, which one would we plump for?
I mean, all of them will be weakened by the end of 2026 because there are people in charge in powerful nations that don't like international rules, is the broad answer. I have a bad feeling in my gut that the International Court of Justice will face a particularly challenging time in 2026 because at some point, some Israeli official that has had a warrant issued for them will set foot in a country that is a signatory to the relevant treaty. And at that point, I think that country will have to make a decision as to whether to arrest that person or not. If it does lead to any kind of arrest, then the International Court of Justice will find itself in the middle of a culture war and a political conflict. I just cannot see how it can resolve that while staying a neutral, honest arbiter of the legislation it's meant to be administering. I think it will end up trying to kind of split the difference. And I honestly think when it comes to judicial institutions, that is their end as an arbiter of ethics, essentially.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the European Convention on Human Rights is under attack from many quarters, particularly because of pressures around immigration. Danny, what would you go for?
Well, I think I'll build on the point I think you've both made, which is that just when these international or intergovernmental institutions or mechanisms become useful for protecting the interests of the weak or the marginalized or the voiceless, is exactly when the powerful abandon them or discredit them, right? And so the ICJ is finally making some really important decisions. Let's not forget on climate as well. There was quite a momentous decision in 2025. European Convention on Human Rights matters to people who are fleeing persecution or who want to protect family life. And that's exactly when some states and some political forces are going after them. I would say the same with the G20, which is something we've been working on a lot in the last couple of years at NEF. Here's an institution that was created in the late 90s to respond to the Asian financial crisis and then upgraded as a result of the 2008 financial crash. We've looked at the last sort of few decades of the G20. And, it's been relatively good at fighting fires, financial fires where they occurred, but less good at fixing the sort of foundational challenges of the global economy. And just as we've had a series of presidencies, notably in Brazil and South Africa, that have said, well, let's use the G20, the space and the forum of the 20 biggest economies in the world to have collaboration on inequality or climate finance or debt, is exactly when a bunch of powerful states, notably the US, have abandoned them, right? President Trump didn't go to the South African G20 summit in November. He said it was a sort of genocide of white people going on in South Africa, and so he boycotted. And he's going to be the president of the G20 next year. And he's already uninvited South Africa. And he said that the G20 is going to go back to basics, looking at how we deregulate the global economy, how we assure energy supply, which I presume means oil and gas, and drill, baby, drill. And so here are these institutions, these sort of really important attempts in the 20th century to try to create meaningful international collaboration just as they start to feel useful being vandalized.
The United States is not participating in official talks at the G20 in South Africa. I saw the South African president running his mouth a little bit against the United States and the president of the United States earlier today, and that language is not appreciated by the president or his team. The representative of the embassy in South Africa is simply there to recognize that the United States will be the host of the G20. They are receiving that send-off at the end of the event. They are not there to participate in official talks, despite what the South African president is falsely claiming.
Seeing as we've mentioned Trump's importance to all this, let's zoom into something a bit more specific. The US midterms. What's your gut feeling about them? What's your instinct in terms of what they will do to global politics? Will they help stabilize it or destabilize it further? Do you want to go first, Naomi?
I mean, I think I'd probably come down on the side of probably destabilize. Trump will likely do more outrageous executive action, more foreign policy negatives to distract from any electoral failure or congressional investigations if he loses the House or the Senate. And there's also the potential he pulls some, really crazy shit to stop people voting or throw ballots out, etc. And then you have Putin and Xi Jinping. And if they see Trump weaken politically in the US, they might think their window of advantage is changing as well. On the stabilizing side of the argument, though, he hasn't used Congress to pull off any of his tariffs or illegal killings overseas, but it's unclear if that's because he knew he wouldn't be opposed. If he loses Congress, the question then will be if Congress can reassert itself on issues like tariffs and military action, because the carte blanche provided by the Supreme Court suggests that they won't be able to on the latter.
I'm on the destabilizing end of it in terms of global implications. So, if you think about the G20, as I said, Trump's going to be the chair of. He's already said he's going to host the summit, the Leaders Summit, on one of his golf courses outside Miami. It's going to be after the midterms. They've delayed the summit from November, when it's normally held, to December. If he's had a really bad midterm elections, it doesn't necessarily mean he's going to change his behavior. To your point, Naomi, he's going to still, maybe even feel more emboldened to go and do the stuff globally and pursue the sort of MAGA America First agenda globally, because he's going to say, well, I'm going to prove to you that this is the approach that works. And And if he does better than expected, or the Republicans do better than expected, he's going to be just as emboldened. So in some ways, this is the strange situation we're in, the sort of democratic checks and balances that were so carefully woven into the US Constitution don't seem to be resilient in the context we're in today.
So I have a slightly different answer. I think if the midterms happen and are relatively free, and I do mean relatively, there will be some gerrymandering. We can see those moves already. It will have a stabilizing effect because I feel that there is an unspoken fear around the world that we're not going to see any midterms, at least not any free ones. There is something niggling in me. He has done such things that he cannot possibly allow one of the houses of the legislature to move to a majority that might be able to check him, investigate him, do any of that, or impede his progress. It's almost like if he's going to make a move to become some sort of authoritarian emperor, it will be before these midterms. So I think if they happen, provided they are relatively free, they will have a hugely stabilizing effect because everyone will think, okay, so there is still the possibility that in 2 years' time, there will be a change of government. I might be alone in this. I might just be projecting my own fears. But I have a gnawing feeling in my gut that he's not going to allow midterms to go on, especially if he's doing poorly in the polls. He will either steal them in some way or doctor them in some way, or simply find an excuse, go to war with someone to say that we can't have elections because we're now at war with Venezuela or whatever.
Mr. President, your war on narcoterrorism from our southern border and beyond clearly will save American lives. Moving forward for Venezuela, what do you think is next for the Venezuelan people now that you have removed Maduro so that he can face American justice?
Well, we're making that decision now. We can't take a chance on letting somebody else run and just take over where he left or left off. So we're making that decision now. We'll be involved in it very much.
The mere fact of midterms happening and yielding some sort of democratic result, to me, it will be a miracle.
There's an interesting thing that's been going on in the latter part of 2025 about the sort of affordability roadshow that the Trump administration was doing to convince people that actually everything's getting better and the tariffs will kick in and all that sort of stuff. And the polling suggests the opposite. The majority of Americans think that the cost of living has never been worse, including Trump supporters and voters. And so at some point, the economic reality is going to bite. The economy,
especially if the AI bubble bursts.
Yeah, exactly. And that may well be the undoing. But I suppose the big question it's always been with this administration is how much damage can they do to the American economy, to the global system, to democracy, before Americans wake up to the reality.
It's interesting. It all goes back to what Kim Darroch told us before the election. He said that Trump is a remarkable communicator to the extent that he can kind of alter reality for the people who believe in him. The one thing he cannot change is your bill at the supermarket, whether your money is enough to take you to the end of the month. That is the one part of reality that he can do nothing to alter, even for people who fervently believe in him. And that's the one thing that he is manifestly failing at the moment. And so that is, I think, cause for optimism.
Quiet Riot.
Wherever Bud goes, his harmonica goes with him. It's a pocket full of soul. Now he's living with prostate cancer. He asked his doctor about Xtandi enzalutamide. Xtandi 40 milligram tablets treats men with prostate cancer that has spread to other parts of the body and responds to a medical or surgical treatment to lower testosterone. Xtandi may cause serious side effects: seizure, a brain condition called PRESS, allergic reactions, heart disease that can lead to death, falls and bone fractures, swallowing problems, or choking that can lead to death. Stop Xtandi and get medical help at once if your face, tongue, lip, or throat start swelling. Tell your doctor at once if you faint, have a seizure, quickly worsening headache, decreased alertness, confusion, vision problems, chest pain or discomfort, or shortness of breath. Xtandi can cause harm to an unborn baby or miscarriage. Use birth control during and 3 months after Xtandi. Common side effects include muscle and joint pain, feeling unusually tired, hot flashes, constipation, less appetite, diarrhea, high blood pressure, bleeding, falls, fractures, and headache. Talk to your doctor and visit Xtandi.com.
Quiet Riot.
Let's do another specific one, slightly more fun one. 10 years on from the EU referendum, What do you think the UK most still misunderstands about Europe?
I think that the UK is still anywhere near a priority for them. When you go to Brussels, there will be people who want to talk about the reset, but it is like so far down the priority list. They have got so many other things that matter to them that they're trying to prioritize, that they're grappling with. And we talk about it so often here in the UK. Our government is pinning so much on the reset in terms of getting growth back into the economy that we feel it and want it far, far, far more than the average person over the Channel or Irish Sea does. There are still suspicions, of course, about the UK's relationship with the USA. We have always been seen as a little bit two-faced when it comes to, which way we turn. And with Trump in the White House, it really is now a critical point of distrust. And whether Europeans really believe it or not, it's a very convenient excuse if they don't want to give us more in terms of concessions around an agri-food deal. Oh, well, the UK are busy trying to get their deal done with the US. They're already allowing a certain number of metric tons of beef into the UK. We don't want hormone beef coming into the single market. Therefore, let's not give them an inch, whether it's on issues around our access to the Security Action for Europe Fund, that big safe defence fund that we're pitching for that talks have collapsed on. You will hear people using the excuse of, oh, but they are so intrinsically linked into US defence, even though, of course, so many EU nations are too. And because really the issue is about the French domestic defence sector really not wanting to compete with the UK. So I think that the overriding thing that we probably don't appreciate fully here in the UK is that the EU are nowhere near prioritising us the way we would like to be. And secondly, that they will use our honest broker position as we try to frame ourselves with the US as a reason to keep us out and not trust us fully.
You see, I would agree with that in one of two facets, because I think actually I was going to say that the thing the UK still does not understand about the EU is that it has two characters. It has one character as a collection of member states and a collection of leaders, where doing bilateral deals and things like that goes down well. But it also has a collective nature. It is an organism in its own right that really hates it when you try to go over its head and deal bilaterally with people within it. And what I would say is that I think you are right as to the perception of the UK from an institutional European Union point of view, but I don't think that applies from a collection of nations and leaders point of view. I look at the way Merz and Macron and, Meloni and people like that behave towards the UK and speak about Starmer, and I get the distinct impression that they are not only happy with him being the sort of Trump whisperer bridge between them and a rogue United States, but that they actively encourage it, that there is a very conscious and coordinated good cop, bad cop routine going on, and that they're very, very appreciative of the role Starmer is playing within that.
It feels like what the UK, or most people in the UK, don't think enough about is the sort of idea of Europe, the founding logic that created the European Union. We spent a couple of years debating in or out. Then we spent 10 years almost debating the sort of finer details of, what should happen at the Northern Ireland border, or what exactly should a youth mobility scheme look like. And in all of that, we've missed the beauty of what the project was about, which was about avoiding war on the continent and building collaboration between nations. And there was an economic logic that not only by trading together, we'd be stronger together, and an economic logic, by the way, that is really upsetting a lot of Americans, right? Why does Musk hate the EU? Because the EU is one of the few entities in the world that has the economic muscle to stand up to...
to regulate him, to try and regulate him. Yeah.
Exactly. And so the idea, if you will, of what that is about, which is remarkable in modern historical terms, we've lost sight of because we've been so distracted by all of this. And just at a time, again, in world history, the world needs Europe to stand together, particularly in light of what's coming out of the US and the national security strategy and things like that. And I wish there was some way of having a sort of honest and constructive conversation in the UK about, do we want to be part of that European project, the idea of Europe?
On climate, Danny, I'm sure you will have a lot to say. Are we moving into a phase of political consequences, I guess, rather than political promises.
Oh, absolutely. I think 2026 is going to be the year when we'll really feel what climate vulnerability and climate breakdown means in our everyday lives. You were talking earlier, Alex, about the sort of the bill at the supermarket. Already we're seeing food prices being affected by climate breakdown, and certain commodities prices have been shooting up. We're already seeing the economic impacts and devastation caused by extreme weather events. Insurers are starting to price in climate uncertainty into every, all sorts of insurance products. And so the consequences of climate change are being felt. That is really important. It's no longer some sort of abstract thing about, 1.5 degrees here or,
But
something.
why are
that's
they
happening
not
in the
being
future.
made explicit? That's my question. They're being felt, but they're somehow not being linked to what's going on.
Yeah, because the politics of climate change, it's also 10 years, by the way, since the Paris Agreement, right? We marked that anniversary in December. And what's happened in those 10 years is the sort of political consensus, the global consensus around climate action seems to have been ripped apart by, again, political entrepreneurs who've made mileage out of a sort of anti-net zero type agenda and convincing us that actually this is all a hoax and it doesn't really affect us. But, that's where it gets consequential. It's just like the sort of, it's the economy stupid. I think there is the sort of, it's the climate stupid will start to be felt this year. And, I know you guys are being, we've been gloomy to date, but there are upside consequences as well in terms of what's happening. You remember in 2025, we saw for the first time in modern history again, that wind and solar was responsible for generating more of our electricity than fossil fuels, right? But then coal. That's brilliant. Like, who would have thought even 10 years ago that we would have got to that sort of speed of transition in some parts of the world? And so it is also consequential that the pace of the transition is really accelerating, certainly in some parts of the world, in China and Pakistan, not nearly as fast as it should be here in the UK. But there is a sort of upside consequence as well that we need to pay attention to this year.
Yeah, I find it astonishing that parties like Reform are sort of anti-climate action. Because if you think about it, becoming self-reliant on renewables, is there any more palpable sovereignty than that for a country? We need to move to a model where budgets recognize the costs directly. You look at every company, it has to set money aside for predictable risks and predictable shocks, right? It has to put funds aside because it knows it's being sued by X amount of people over some boo-boo it did 10 years ago. Why shouldn't governments? Because I think only then we can begin to glean the real trade-offs. When a chancellor stands up and says, if we increase renewables by X, we can release Y amount of our contingency fund back into public services, then I think that link will be made palpable. And I don't understand why we don't do that.
We don't price in the sort of externalities, I suppose, that is the best way to put it. And so if you don't really price in the cost of human activity on nature, or if you don't really calculate those sort of costs you're talking about of doing business in a contemporary climate vulnerable world, then you're lost. And the problem is most economists stick their head in the sand and presume that it's sort of all be fine, and it's not. And we can do better. And it's small tweaks in the way that we calculate things, or way a company might think about its own finances will make huge impacts into both our understanding of climate change, but also the behaviors that we'll all pursue.
Naomi, one final question to wrap up this section. Conflicts abound, and some are getting a lot of attention and some are not really getting a lot of attention. What do you think is the ongoing conflict that worries you in terms of escalation or spillover, I guess, in 2026? What is not really on most people's radar, but might have big consequences?
There are more than we know about because our media just doesn't report many of them. We've talked a bit about Sudan on other shows, and Behind the Lines with Arthur Snell as a go-to for the conflicts happening there. And of course, Russia is often involved in African conflict as well. I think the Venezuela-US stuff is escalating quickly. This might be out of date by the time the show goes out, but I think Trump is getting more desperate and unhinged as time goes on, and that is certainly something that I didn't have on my 2025 radar, but has nonetheless come up. But in terms of just pure worry, which conflict worries me the most in terms of spillover, it is, of course, Russia and Ukraine. If you listen to Arthur Snell's conversation with Bob Seeley that went out just before Christmas. It is full of truly terrifying stuff. And as we talked about on our show with Anessa Ditter just before Christmas too, Alex, the UK is simply not ready for the kind of warfare being practiced daily by the Russians. And the increased likelihood that critical infrastructure has already been sabotaged and can be triggered at any moment is something that we're not ready for, but is rising up the probable rather than just possible. And peace negotiations consistent with the Russian playbook of hybrid total warfare are not about achieving peace, but to advance their own military strategy. And then you combine all of that with the increasing domestic weakness of many European leaders. It is the thing that will keep me awake at night this year.
Quiet Riot.
I didn't realize I was wasting $415 a month until I downloaded Rocket Money. I thought I had my finances under control until the app laid out all my spending and categorized it for me. Takeout, shopping, and unused subscriptions were quietly draining my account. And as a result, my savings took a backseat. But Rocket Money doesn't just tell you what you're wasting money on. It takes action to save you money. First, the app looks at your income and monthly expenses and calculates how much you can safely spend each day to stay under budget. Rocket Money also finds and cancels unwanted subscriptions for you and even negotiates better rates on your bills, so you have more money in your pocket. On average, Rocket Money members can save up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. Users love the app with over 186,000 five-star ratings. It's time to simplify your finances and take control of your money. Go to rocketmoney.com/cancel to get started. That's rocketmoney.com/cancel. rocketmoney.com/cancel.
Quiet Riot.
Before we plunge back into the deep end, we're going to pause for something lighter, but no less revealing. New Year resolutions. Not the performative ones you announced on Instagram and abandoned my bid January, but the habits, the boundaries, the quiet rebellions that might actually make surviving 2026 a bit more bearable. So, Danny, Alex, think let's run a marathon and more let's stop mainlining despair after 10 p.m. This is about how to stay sane, engaged, and vaguely hopeful while all following politics for a living. So I want you to give me one or two resolutions that you genuinely care about, and they can be personal, political, or anywhere awkwardly in between. Danny, I'm going to come to you first. One political habit you've developed you actively want to unlearn next year?
Well, the political habit that seems to have beset the government last year was about blaming its predecessors. So I'm going to stop blaming my predecessors.
Your predecessors in government.
I think there is something about sort of getting out of the Westminster bubble. I work in a Westminster think tank. We're just literally across the river from Parliament. And the temptation is to pay too much attention to what happens in the bubble. And, the good thing about NEF is that we've got, maybe a quarter of the team or something like that works outside of London in communities doing organizing work. And that's the stuff I think I need to do more of, because that's, tuning in to the lived reality of people in the UK is going to be super critical this year, I think. Not just if we're going to get policy right, but also if we're going to find the ways to win the argument on all those progressive things that we care about.
Alex, what about you? We're not going to get you out of London, that's for sure.
Well, if you get me out of London, you'll get me out of the UK, put it that way. And that is something I'm actively considering, because our work has now become so mobile. I am beginning to think, why am I not in a place with better weather, for starters? Anyway, I think I'd like to stop ignoring my instinct. I've become incredibly aware that sometimes I have a hunch about someone or something that I then talk myself out of, because I tell myself, come on now, you're a rational being, look at the evidence, check everything, be fair, be balanced, look at both sides of the argument, and I end up in a different place than I was, and often my initial instinct was absolutely bang on. So I think I need to find some sort of different balance on politics to honor my instinct without ignoring the evidence and suddenly becoming a sort of medium of podcasting.
Not giving up humble brags then?
No, no, not at all. I love humble brags. No, listen, my resolution to myself is to be less certain, to express myself with less certainty, especially on social media. I think we all do a lot of quite strident, this is my view stuff, chiseled in stone. And I think that then puts you in a situation of having to defend that as chiseled in stone when someone raises possibly a decent counterpoint. If we start completing this political Sudoku puzzle a little bit in pencil and get less defensive about occasionally having to erase something and write in something else, I think everything will become just a little bit better.
Lovely. Well, mine is much more personal, and it is about being a woman. The first one is I really am going to stop wearing high heels. I say this all the time, and then I feel that I have to at certain events. And the times that men wear something that makes them uncomfortable is almost never. I know men hate wearing ties and dinner jackets and things like that, but it's rare nowadays that they have to do that. Whereas women are still conditioned to squeeze their feet into painful footwear and then stand on them for hours at a time. So fuck it, I'm not going to do it. I may once or twice during the year when I get dressed up and want to feel fancy, but I'm just not habitually doing it anymore.
I wonder what size you are, because one of my resolutions is to wear more heels.
Oh, okay. Well, I can give you plenty of pairs should you want them. I also am just going to try and call out sexism every time I see it happen and hear it happen. I've become, as many women have, a product of the era we grew up in. I've internalized and normalized huge amounts of misogyny and sexism. And I owe it to the women I work with. If I see an act of misogyny happening towards them, be it a microaggression or something very overt and obvious, I'm going to call it out in the moment, rather than what often happens is you don't want to escalate a situation, you don't want a big public spat, so you'll quietly take the women aside afterwards and say, I saw that happen, I'm really sorry, wasn't it horrible? I'm going to make a really concerted effort to step in the moment that I hear it and see it happen and call it out for what it is, because enough is enough.
Quiet Riot.
Now for the bit where it all gets uncomfortably familiar. UK politics in 2026, the personalities, the pressures, and the persistent sense that everything is simultaneously about to change and stubbornly stick. We're going to look at where the major parties might be heading, where the leadership tensions in Westminster finally boil over, and what's happening beyond it, from the Senedd and Holyrood to local elections that often tell you more about the national mood than ministers would like to admit. In other words, what does power look like at home in 2026, and who's really feeling the consequences? Danny, by the end of the year, which UK political party do you think is going to be under the most internal strain, and what's going to be driving that?
Well, there's going to be plenty to choose from, but I suppose for me it's Reform, because of the wildly divergent groups that back Reform, right? The voter coalition that we're seeing in polls is so diverse. People with all sorts of different views on the economy, on society, who've come together as they, at least in polling at the moment and behind the Reform banner, keeping that together during the course of the year, particularly as the party, is under greater scrutiny, is being asked to be, to make clear its views on a whole range of policy ideas, is going to be true. It's incredibly difficult for any party that wants to be large and in government to hold together its base. But I think it's going to be particularly challenging for Reform to do that this year.
I agree. And I think, if they do very well in the Senedd elections, as is predicted, it'll be the first time that they are really scrutinized on, well, who are going to be your portfolio holders? What do they stand for? What are they actually going to deliver? I mean, this is a party that is very famously going into that set of elections without even letting the electorate know who would be First Minister if they were to top the poll. So I think you're dead right that the long overdue scrutiny of who they are, what they are, why they are, will become more acutely focused this year. Alex, do you have a view on that? Do you think
it's really interesting?
Or somebody else?
Completely independently, I've also gone for Reform. So maybe there is genuine cause for optimism there, and for different reasons to both of you, which is interesting. Not to say that your reasons are not completely valid, basically, as a party grows, when it has a control freak at the top who is reticent to delegate, and when they do delegate, they don't then have their staffs back. They second guess decisions or distance themselves every time something goes wrong. I can see those growing pains really manifesting themselves inside reform, and especially when you have the external pressure of people like Elon Musk, Rupert Lowe, Ben Habib, Stephen Yaxley Lennon taking potshots at it. The review into the financing of politics, I think, will be intensely uncomfortable for reform. Tories are already beginning to do a little bit better, and I suspect they will do even more so after they ditch Kemi Badenoch. I have the feeling that despite this belief within reform that Nigel Farage is the be-all and end-all, there will begin to rear its head a belief that maybe actually people like the party and our policies, and maybe it shouldn't be a one-man band. And as Farage goes forward and has to start identifying a sort of potential cabinet of the future and give powerful voices to the person that he says will be his chancellor and the person he says will be his home secretary, I think there will be a lot of arguments within that party, because you see it playing out even at the council level. You know, they're like rats in the sack.
It's then my job as leader to appoint a cabinet, which I've done. And the way the constitution works, it is the leader and the cabinet who make the big decisions. Now, because I'm not a dictator or an autocrat, I like feedback, I like to discuss, I like to hear what everybody thinks. However, when it comes to making the really big decisions, and I'm afraid LGR is one of those really big decisions, sometimes I will make a decision that might not be liked by everybody in the group. But I'm afraid you're just going to have to fucking suck it up, okay? Because I am the democratically elected leader. Because let's not forget, we are the shop window in KCC. People are looking at us, they're judging us every single day, every single minute of every single day. Nigel knows that. He is super aware that we are the flagship council.
They have been brought together in a really haphazard way, really out of a lust for power and a dislike of foreigners. There is nothing ideological that connects them.
Yeah.
And so when they get into a position where they have to exercise power, they begin to tear each other to bits.
And that has happened with almost every party Farage has been involved with. I don't think he is going to face a serious leadership challenge in 2026.
No, I don't think so either. Sorry, I don't think so
But
either.
I think you're right to say that Kemi Badenoch will. And of course, at the time of recording, the prevailing SW1 narrative is that it is a when, not if Starmer faces that challenge. So my question to both of you isn't the detail of those challenges and who the runners and riders are, but it's this. I'll start with you, Alex. Do you think that if and when there is a leadership challenge within the Labour Party, it will be because Starmer has stepped aside himself to avoid a bloodbath? Or do you think he tries to front it out and puts himself forward alongside other candidates?
There is little to go on in terms of record. And this is one of those peculiar times during which I'm reminded that even though Keir Starmer is very experienced in public life, having held prominent positions, he's actually a really new politician. He's only been at this for 10 years. And I think that that becomes a problem when you try to predict his behavior. And obviously a big problem, I think, for the people eyeing up a leadership challenge, that they don't know how he will react. They don't know if he will go, I will stand
fall
aside
on his sword or
Yeah.
wait for a bloody coup. Yeah.
It's an interesting concept. My instinct tells me that he has given himself to the local elections and the Scotland and Welsh elections, not in terms of resigning, but in terms of taking stock of where they're at. And if those are really, really bad, as most people expect them to be, I think he may well step aside.
Danny, you've talked about NEF having teams out in the country doing great community work. What should people be watching outside Westminster that might actually tell us more about the national mood than we get in and around Zone 1?
it's the economy, stupid. It's cost of living. It's how vulnerable and, people are feeling, how insecure they're feeling. That has some real political implications. I mean, to your question or the point about just now about leadership changes, we can change the people in power, but unless we fundamentally rewire the way that politics works, or even just challenge some of the sort of dangerous economic orthodoxy that different parties have been tethered to over the last 40 years around liberalizing the economy, privatizing a whole bunch of things, financializing, what should be fundamental human rights. That's what I think people are angry about. And I don't know I'm sure you will have seen it, but, a few months ago, More in Common had that report called Shattered Britain, where they looked at how people were feeling. And what worried me in that research, which wasn't beyond polling, was focus groups and a whole range of other methodologies that they used, was that lots of people are just so fed up with the status quo, so fed up with the way that the economy works and politics works, that they're just, they just want to roll the dice on something and something different. Presumably that's why Reform and the Greens, for example, are setting themselves apart from centrist politicians. And I think that's what you'd hear if you go and spend some time with my colleagues in different parts of the country. By the way, Alex, we should do a podcast episode in Manchester with some of the community organizers we work with. You'll love it. The weather might not be good, but it will give you a very different perspective, I think.
I love Manchester anyway. I did a spell there working at the Royal Exchange, and it feels like a second home to me.
Quiet Riot.
Adobe Acrobat Studio, so brand new. Show me all the things PDFs can do. Do your work with ease and speed. PDF Spaces is all you need. Do hours of research in an instant with key insights from an AI assistant. Pick a template with a click. Now your prezzo looks super slick. Close that deal? Yeah, you won. Do that, doing that, did that, done. Now you can do that with Acrobat. Now you can do that with the all-new Acrobat. It's time to do your best work with the all-new Adobe Acrobat Studio.
Quiet Riot.
Alex, Danny's made the point about people reaching for something completely different. The Greens on the left, Reform on the right, because of this sense that everything is broken, nothing of the status quo has delivered for them, so it's time to pull a very different lever. You and I recorded an episode after Trump's victory the second time round with Matthew McGregor from 38 Degrees, who is a very seasoned US Politico too, who said that he never forgets the door he knocked on.
And I've never forgotten that story.
Yeah, was it the first or second Obama campaign? I can't remember, but the guy said, before I owned my own house, I had a good job and I could send my children to college. I now don't own my own property. I don't have a job and I cannot afford to send either of my children to study. So I will keep sacking whoever is in charge until that changes, until my life gets better. Do you think that polarization forming between those on the left and the right, abandoning the more centrist and well-established parties in the middle, could mean that we end up in a situation where, as we gallop towards the next general election, we may even find that it's not a referendum between Labour and Reform, but maybe the Greens and Reform?
I mean, it's possible. All I can go on is the experience we have from other European countries. And the experience we have from other European countries that have always had a more advanced left and right than this country, which has been really a two-party country with the Lib Dems as a middling option. If I look at countries that do have a centre-left and a left, a centre-right and a right, and a centre party, then that doesn't tend to be what happens. What happens is that you get almost a four-way fragmentation of the vote. In our case, it might even be a five-way fragmentation of the vote. And there are signs pointing that way. So we might end up in coalition territory. The most likely outcome, again, just looking at the continental experience, and of course it's no predictor because we have a vastly different electoral system, because we have vastly different political culture, but it's the best predictor we have. And looking at what happens, the centre-left and centre-right party tend to form a grand coalition. In those circumstances, they tend to get together, sometimes with the centre party, and exclude both left and right. And I find that a really interesting possibility for this country, especially if the price of someone like the Lib Dems for participating in that kind of coalition is a proper change of electoral system, which is, I think, the one thing that if I could wave a magic wand, that would change the mood in the country, the atmosphere in the country, it would be that proportional representation would re-enfranchise people. It would be the most powerful message that your vote matters. Any party, I think, that moves towards offering that will do very well at the next election.
One thing we don't talk enough about is that something like 80% of free and fair elections held in the last 4 years have gone against the incumbent, right? And even Mark Carney and Anthony Albanese in Canada or Australia managed to hang on by the skin of their teeth because of the sort of anti-Trump sentiment in those countries. And the winners of recent elections, even if they won by a landslide like the Labour government did here in the UK, weren't necessarily getting an endorsement of their political mandate or their project. People just want to change, right? And they're fed up with the status quo. But then what's happening is those people once in power are just more of the same. It's a little bit of tinkering here or there. It's fiscal orthodoxy. It's more liberalization. It's all of that. And that's what I worry a little about the sort of what's happening in the center is a refusal to move from this sort of dangerous orthodoxy, refusal even for a bit of mea culpa that some of what, say, the Labour government did in the late 90s, early 2000s wasn't necessarily the right thing and they need to change tack. And, the more they keep doing that, the more it creates the sort of space for the extremes to challenge their credibility.
Oh, Danny, I want to stand up and cheer at that, honestly, because I think one of the biggest misconceptions that exists in politics today is the idea that a center-right party, a centrist party, and a center-left party cannot offer radical solutions. It's just not true. There are radical center-left policies. It's just the parties are not reaching for them. They're reaching for sort of a management around the fringes of what's going on. And that just won't cut it anymore. That's why the parties that are further to the left and right are very popular at the moment, because they're offering radical solutions. People can see, they can look around them, they can look at their life, and they know that their problems will not be solved by tinkering. And so to offer more tinkering, it's like you have a death wish as a political party.
I agree with both of you wholeheartedly. This radical liberal who barely goes an hour without mentioning the need for PR had her heart singing as you were both talking. Danny, final question then for this section. We know that there's an elections bill coming at some point. It probably will not include PR. There may be amendments to try and make it include it. Is there any other legislation planned that you think we should be keeping an eye on? Or is there legislation that should be planned and just bloody well isn't?
Well, there's lots of that. But the thing I'm going to be keeping an eye out for is the implications of the devolution bill. We're going to really see some of the impact of what the Labour government did in its first year take shape next year, as mayoral authorities are going to have a bigger, more steady settlement with Treasury. They're going to get more powers. There's going to be some meaningful changes, and that might help. It might help in terms of bringing politicians closer to people and communities. It might help nurture more radical solutions, more community ownership, investing in the foundational economy, the sorts of things that will make a difference to people's lives.
And I think the thing to keep an eye on is when we get the result of elections that will be fought under a more proportionate system, the analysis that will be done by Electoral Reform Society and others to show what would have happened if they'd been fought under first past the post. One of my big gurus, of course, is Karl Popper, who wrote The Open Society and Its Enemies nearly 100 years ago. And in it, he says that PR is vastly preferable, but that if you are going to have first past the post, you can only have it in a country with a two-party system. And that it just does not work. And we know that it doesn't here in the UK, where we now have 5 parties in some nations all bunched up together in the polls and fragmenting votes all over the place. So, yeah, here we go. The Quiet Riot wish for this year that almost certainly won't come true. PR for Westminster elections.
Quiet Riot.
To finish, we're ditching probability and embracing pure surprise. This is the round where realism takes a back seat, and we ask what would genuinely shock us if it happened in 2026. Not predictions you'd put money on, but events so unexpected that make you stop mid-sentence and say, well, I did not have that on my 2026 bingo card. So, quick-fire instinctive answers is what I'm looking for, and no hedging. What outcome in 2026 would genuinely shock you, even after everything we've already lived through?
Trump resigns.
Feet first, Danny. He will be carried out of that Oval Office feet first, I'm afraid. But that might happen. I guess Labour doing well in Scotland or Wales, I mean, they are so disliked and the polling we're seeing is so anti-Labour that if they manage somehow in 5 months to turn it into not a victory, but like not an absolute drubbing, I would find that quite an eye-catching result. How about you?
A politician voluntarily limiting their own power because it's the right thing to do. And I think I would just assume
Any year, though, right?
we'd
That would be
accidentally
shocking
switch
any
to
year.
becoming a Scandinavian country. Yeah, I mean, I'm a small L liberal, and I believe that power corrupts, and I believe that we therefore need to disseminate it as low as possible, empowering people to be the very best version of themselves. And just time and time again, we have politicians that concentrate power. They often do it under the guise of decentralizing, and they claim that they are giving power away and that they're devolving it, and they're really not. And my fear always when left-wing governments do that is that they make policy because they're in power, forgetting that what they've done is created a law that can be abused by the people queuing up to take their place after the next election. So, wow, I would be shocked if any politician voluntarily limited their own power because it was the right thing to do.
That sounds like a wish again, I'm afraid, rather than an unlikely prediction. Okay, how about a political comeback or collapse or realignment that you think is possible, but very, very unlikely? Let's start with you, Naomi, this time.
One would think that Mandelson was done. But this is the guy that has had, I mean, at least 3 major political comebacks after huge scandal before. But, I mean, if anyone's got 9 lives, it's that man. I reckon he could come back.
Right. How about you, Danny?
Well, I would have said Boris in the same vein, but maybe that's more likely. So my unlikely realignment is that Keir Starmer realizes he's losing too many members to the Greens, offers Zach Polanski the deputy PM job, and there's a sort of realignment of British politics where the sort of centre-left comes back and the sort of green-left coalition forms.
Oh, wow. That would be quite extraordinary. So mine is Gordon Brown. I've tried to think, like, if we get into a situation of needing a caretaker prime minister because something so dramatic has happened, I've tried to think of people whose cachet has increased, as it were, since they left office. And Gordon Brown pops up in my head. I think since leaving office, he has shown himself to be a good person with genuinely honorable priorities.
Yeah.
It seems to me that his reputation now is better than when he was in office. And it wouldn't surprise me if, at a pinch, Labour reached for him as a sort of caretaker leader, interim leader.
Oh, be still my beating heart.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I love it.
Let's move to the slightly lighter side of things. What about a positive surprise? What is the thing that would restore your faith a little bit in politics?
I don't know if it's lighter, Alex, but in a world which desperately needs international collaboration, I hope this year we can see a proper peace deal in the Middle East, the resolution to the Ukraine-Russia war, an international agreement on wealth taxes. These are exactly the sort of things that the world needs. And if our leaders can actually get around to doing these sorts of things, it would restore my faith in politics.
For me, it would be land value taxation being in the next budget. An incredibly progressive form of taxation. It would boost productivity. It would really help solve the housing crisis, give faith back to the younger generation, and do a hell of a lot for our coffers in the long term. So yeah, it would be a chancellor saying, do you know what? That is the biggest constraint and we need to deal with it. What about you, Alex?
I don't have one because, as you know, I am an optimist. I expect all sorts of positive things to happen in 2026. My faith in politics is still strong because the alternatives are unfathomable. And so it must be. And I trust in people's capacity to surprise us on the upside. Is that a bit disgusting?
You really are one in a million.
Yeah, I think an idiot is the word you were reaching for there.
Well, which means what? There's 67 other Alexes around the UK at the moment.
Yes, and they all show up whenever there is a casting call for any kind of part I might be suitable for. Right, so final question for both of you. What's the one headline that you absolutely do not expect to read in the coming year?
Kemi Badenoch storms into pole position with 40% net favourability rating.
Rachel Reeves abandons fiscal rules.
Alex?
Keir Starmer was right about everything.
The Daily Mail.
Right, and that's the end of this New Year special edition episode. Massive thanks to Danny for joining us once again. It's been a delight to have you on the show, Danny. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Happy New Year.
Don't forget to back us on ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod for far less than a monthly gym membership. And stay tuned, we'll be back very, very soon with lots more content.
And if you make one New Year resolution that you can actually keep, please let it be to leave Quiet Riot behind the lines and Podyssey a lovely, favourable review and share it with loads of friends and family so that 2026 can be the year our family of shows goes global.
Thank you for tuning in. We wish you all a very happy, healthy and prosperous new year.
We love you mucho. Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Alex Andreou. Produced by Ken Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simona Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese.
Quiet Riot.